The war began with a distant thunder, the rumble of tanks, the shriek of bombers, the echo of boots. For millions, World War II was a battle of nations, but for the children it tore from their homes, it was something else entirely. It was a war of silence, of hiding, of hunger, of loss. In a quiet village on the outskirts of Warsaw, 10-year-old Anka watched as soldiers marched past her window. Her parents whispered late into the night, their faces pale with fear. Then one morning her father didn't come home. And that night, her mother packed a small satchel with bread, a picture of the Virgin Mary, and a single change of clothes. She kissed Anka on the forehead, wrapped her arms tightly around her, and said, "Run east. Don't stop. Find the forest." By dawn, Anka was alone. Her story was not unique. In France, a 7-year-old boy named Henri escaped a convoy headed for a labor camp and survived by sleeping in barns and stealing food from abandoned cellars. In Ukraine, orphan siblings Natalia and Bohdan lived beneath the floorboards of a ruined church for nearly a year, venturing out only at night. Children became shadows. They aged without aging. They forgot birthdays, forgot laughter, forgot that the world had ever been safe. They stole potatoes from fields, drank from streams, and clung to whatever they could find that reminded them of home. A doll's arm, a family photo, a string of buttons. For the youngest orphans, survival depended entirely on the kindness of strangers. Strangers who risked their lives to smuggle children across borders or hide them in cellars, attics, and barns. Some forged documents to pass them as their own. Others gave them new names, new identities. A Jewish girl named Sarah became a Catholic Marie. A Roma boy named Jacob became Yannick, a shoemaker's apprentice. But even the smallest mistake, a wrong accent, a prayer mumbled incorrectly, could mean death. The sound of marching boots echoed like thunder through the broken streets of Warsaw. 9-year-old Emil clutched his younger sister Zofia's hand as they moved swiftly along the edge of bombed-out buildings. Their home was now nothing more than rubble and memories. Their parents, once the solid pillars of their small world, were gone, swallowed by the chaos of war. No goodbyes. No time to mourn. Emil had never felt older. Just days before, he'd been learning to spell words in school. Now he was calculating when to steal bread without being caught. They weren't alone, not entirely. The city was crawling with children like them, shoeless, starving, forgotten. But alliances were rare. Hunger bred desperation, and even children learned to protect what little they had with clenched fists and quick feet. One afternoon, the siblings stumbled across a half-destroyed bookshop. The glass was shattered and papers fluttered like birds in the breeze. Emil didn't care about books anymore, but Zofia, even in her sadness, wandered toward a torn picture book and touched it gently. She didn't say anything, just smiled for the first time in days. Emil felt a pang. She was still a child, and somehow he had become a soldier. That night, they slept beneath the shop's counter, using old jackets and crumpled pages for warmth. The city had grown eerily quiet, as if mourning with them. Sirens had faded, the planes had passed, but the silence was louder than the bombs. Every creak, every gust of wind could mean soldiers were near, or worse, looters. One evening, a woman appeared. Her name was Lydia, a baker's widow who had lost everything too. But she still carried bread in her satchel, baked from scavenged flour and firewood. She found the children sleeping under a stairwell near her ruined shop and brought them food without a word. She didn't ask questions. She just watched them eat like they hadn't in days, then turned and walked away. For the next few weeks, Lydia would come and go like a ghost, always bringing something: crusty bread, boiled potatoes, once even a piece of chocolate. In return, Emil and Zofia helped her gather firewood or fetch water. They never spoke about the past. There was no room for grief anymore, only survival. But not everyone was kind. One morning, when Emil returned from a water run, he found Zofia sobbing, her lip bleeding. A group of older boys had stolen their bread, pushing her into a wall. Emil felt rage bubble in his chest, but what could a 9-year-old do? The world had taught him that pain often came with silence. That winter was brutal. Snow blanketed the ruined streets like a cruel joke, making it harder to move, harder to beg, harder to live. Many children froze. Lydia grew thinner. One morning she didn't show up. Then another day passed. And another. Emil waited in the alley where she used to leave food. Nothing. Zofia began to lose her voice, not from illness, but from sadness. She would only whisper Emil's name, and only when she thought he couldn't hear. Emil knew he had to find a new place, maybe the church. Rumors whispered among the street children said that some kind nuns still lived there, helping whoever could find their way in. The siblings set out, walking for hours through the snow, avoiding soldiers and strange men. When they arrived, the church was dark, damaged, but still standing. Inside, they found only silence, until a creaking door revealed a hunched nun, her face pale and eyes filled with disbelief at the sight of two children covered in snow. She didn't speak. She just opened her arms. For the first time in months, Emil and Zofia were warm. They were still scared, still grieving. But for now, they were no longer alone. The sky was ash-gray with the scent of smoke trailing across broken roofs. It had been days since Eva and Leo had spoken to an adult. After the Red Cross trucks passed their village without stopping, the two children wandered alone through ghost-like towns. Sometimes they heard a voice in the distance. Orders barked in a language they didn't know, but they quickly hid, afraid that any stranger might be the last person they ever saw. Their shoes, once polished and proud, now barely held together. Leo had tied his with torn bits of wire. Eva's coat, stitched from their mother's old tablecloth, hung loose and threadbare. Hunger gnawed at them constantly. They picked berries when they could find them, and once, Eva traded a small locket for half a loaf of bread from a cautious farmer who refused to let them near his house. One morning, they discovered an abandoned railway car tilted off the tracks in the woods. It was quiet, cold, and smelled of rust. But it was shelter. Leo pushed aside some old canvas sacks and they curled up there at night. Eva pretended the stars peeking through the gaps in the wood were their parents looking down, keeping them warm. But even this fragile peace couldn't last. One afternoon they heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. A man in a long coat was approaching the railway car. He wasn't in uniform, but the glint of something metallic on his belt made Eva's heart seize. She whispered for Leo to stay quiet, and they both held their breath as the man walked by, pausing for only a moment. Then, miraculously, he moved on. Later they met others, children like them, silent and wild-eyed, hiding in barns, abandoned schools, even sewage drains. Each had a story. Some had watched their parents dragged away. Others had escaped fires. Some didn't speak at all anymore. They shared what little food they had and learned to look out for one another. In this quiet, invisible war behind the real one, these children became their own army, an army of survivors. A group of older teens had formed a loose kind of underground support. They had maps, messages, and rumors. One night, around a small fire built from broken furniture, Eva heard a boy say there was a train scheduled in 3 days. A safe train. It was heading south. Switzerland, someone whispered. Sounded too good to be true. But when you have nothing left, even a rumor becomes a lifeline. The journey to the station was the most dangerous yet. They had to travel by night, sticking to forest trails and avoiding villages entirely. Once they crossed a bridge under heavy fog, using only the feel of the rail to guide them. Below was nothing but blackness. Leo tripped halfway across, and Eva had to yank him up by the collar before he slid over the edge. On the final night, they reached the outskirts of a station cloaked in silence. No guards. No soldiers. Just the soft hiss of a steam engine waiting in the dark. There was no time to ask questions. A woman in a nurse's cloak signaled them toward an open car. Inside, blankets, water. A small piece of chocolate was placed into each child's hand. Eva and Leo sat holding each other, too afraid to speak, too tired to cry. As the train pulled away, the sound of its wheels over tracks seemed to say, "You are not alone anymore." They moved under moonlight, footsteps crunching over gravel and broken glass. Anna and Lucas had left the city ruins behind. They were headed east, toward a place they had only heard about in whispers, a village untouched by bombs where someone might take them in. But the road was treacherous. Their food was gone, their shoes were breaking apart, and the cold air sliced through their thin coats. They found a half-destroyed barn one night and slept on a pile of hay, using each other's body heat to survive. When it rained, they huddled under abandoned wagons. When it snowed, they cried quietly, afraid their voices might attract attention. Lucas began to limp. His foot had become infected from stepping on a rusted nail. Anna tried everything she could, wrapping it in rags, keeping it dry, even stopping to steal boiled water from a passing field kitchen. But it worsened. On the fourth night of their journey, they heard dogs barking in the distance. They froze. Not because they feared animals, but because dogs meant soldiers. Panicked, they crawled through thick brush, cutting their hands and legs trying to find a place to hide. They came upon a trench from an old battle line, now abandoned. They slipped into it, pressing against the earth. The dogs grew louder and so did the voices. German. Anna pulled Lucas close, placing a hand over his mouth to quiet his whimpers. They held their breath as boots stomped near them. One soldier paused, scanned the trench, and then moved on. When the danger passed, Anna collapsed in the mud, shaking but silent. Lucas clutched her hand. He whispered, "Will it always be like this?" She didn't have an answer. The next morning they found a bombed-out rail line. Anna spotted an open rail cart heading east and made a decision. She helped Lucas in first, then climbed up. The train was filled with coal dust and rats, but it moved, and they were too tired to care. Days blurred. The train took them far from the front line, and finally stopped near a farming village. Weak, starving, and caked in soot, Anna dragged Lucas toward a farmhouse with a candle in the window. She knocked, then collapsed. When she woke, it was warm. She was in a bed. An old woman hovered above her, placing a cool cloth on her forehead. Lucas was asleep beside her, his leg bandaged. "Rest now," the woman whispered. "You're safe." It was the first time in months that Anna believed it might be true. As the war began to fade into memory and the guns finally fell silent, the world took its first breath of peace. But for the orphans scattered across countries, the silence was not soothing, it was deafening. It didn't mean safety. It meant uncertainty. Those who had hidden in forests, orphanages, or makeshift shelters slowly began to emerge, drawn by rumors that towns were rebuilding or by a simple need to find food. Some wandered for days in unfamiliar countryside, clutching the last items they had: photos of mothers, a locket, a toy soldier, symbols of a life now distant. Governments and charities began setting up recovery centers. These were the first real places of warmth many had seen in years. Buildings with proper beds, clean water, and a quiet smile from a nurse. But even these were confusing for children who had lived by instinct and fear. They were asked their names, but some didn't remember. Others gave only fragments of their stories. One little girl in France, Jean, had forgotten her surname. She remembered only the smell of her mother's perfume and the color of her father's coat. When asked where she came from, she pointed to the east and whispered, "The place with the blue church." With the help of old town records and volunteers who searched tirelessly, Jean was eventually reunited with an aunt who had survived in another city. These reunions were rare but powerful. They offered hope to others who still waited, still searched. In Poland, Germany, and the Netherlands, special trains were organized to take children back to their hometowns. Volunteers rode with them, carefully checking passenger lists, stopping at stations where relatives might be waiting, hopeful. Yet for many there was no home to return to. Villages had vanished. Streets no longer held the people they remembered. Some children found only rubble and silence. These were the orphans who became part of new families, adopted by strangers or moved to group homes where they started a different kind of life. And still, the war lived on in their memories. A misplaced sound could bring back a night in the cellar. A sudden light might remind them of a bombing raid. It would take decades for many to fully speak about what they'd seen and how they'd survived. But there was something remarkable about these children. They had grown through unthinkable hardship. They had adapted, endured, and somehow held on to a sense of right and wrong, of kindness, of family, even if that family had to be rebuilt from strangers. In later years, some of them wrote books. Others built orphan foundations or worked in refugee services, quietly ensuring that no child would ever face what they had faced alone again. They turned their pain into purpose. They are the forgotten warriors of the war, not soldiers, not generals, but survivors of silence, of hunger, of loss. Their war was not fought with weapons. It was fought with courage, memory, and the sheer will to live.